Welcome to episode 8 of the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast, the physical, mental, and spiritual journey of mountaineering. It's big peak season here in Alaska, and figured it would be a great opportunity to discuss yet another Denali expedition with a fellow climber. G, as she goes by, is a born and raised Alaskan and spent much of her childhood outside kayaking and hiking near the Arctic Circle. Growing up, G eventually immersed herself in the climbing scene here in Alaska, eventually working her way into the sport of mountaineering. I sit down with G as she shares her journey in preparing for a Denali expedition and how team dynamics played a very unique role during her time on the mountain. In fact, the team she started with was not the team she ended with. Episode 8, Denali, starts now. All right, G, welcome to the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Yeah, it's we're finally here. I know you and I have kind of coordinated back and forth for like the last few weeks. I know my work schedule didn't work out, and then we had some issues getting you on base recently. But we're here now talking about Denali, which I'm super pumped to talk about. I know my last episode was Denali with a good friend of mine, Michaela, who attempted to reach the summit. So it was a really good conversation. And I remember when her and I were discussing, because again, I give the guests kind of free rein on what peak they want to discuss. And initially she asked me, hey, can I do Denali? And my initial thoughts were, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go that big, that quick, with this only being episode 7 at the time. And then now talking with you, I know you mentioned you wanted to talk about Denali as well. Same thing. I was initially a little skeptical of doing Denali kind of back to back, but then after thinking about it, I'm like, you know what, let's just send it because these conversations, whether it's the same peak, like the experiences are going to be completely different, which I absolutely love. So again, really excited to hear your perspective on Denali, and we'll get into that here shortly. But before we get into that, I want to learn a little more about you, which I actually love hearing more about the guests and kind of where you guys come from and what got you into climbing. So if you don't mind spending a few minutes, just letting the listeners know where you're from, which we've already talked about that. You're born and raised here in Alaska, and what got you into mountaineering.
Yeah, so as you said, I'm born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. Lucky enough to say that.
Heck yeah.
I was really fortunate to be raised by wildlife biologist parents who loved the outdoors. So I grew up camping, fishing, just kind of like the quintessential Alaskan experience, which was awesome. And my parents were definitely more interested in like river trips, and I did a lot of like backcountry stuff. I remember we'd take bush planes to like the Arctic Circle to do to float a river for a few weeks as a kid. So that kind of experience, which is really amazing. However, I didn't do a lot of like hiking or climbing or anything like that until I was a little older. So I kind of came into that on my own. I went to school in Wisconsin, which I think I know other people from Anchorage can relate to this probably, but leaving was what really made me first appreciate Alaska and mountains in general. So I can still remember my first times coming home for the summer and being like, oh, wow. It's like I never had really seen it before with those eyes. So yeah, I think it was when I, in my early 20s, I came home and I did just a little hike up Rendezvous Peak and was running on the ridges there, and I remember thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. Like this, just the views, the scenery, just feeling so small. And that single hike was what inspired me. And I decided then I really wanted to just like pursue adventure in the mountains. Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned Rendezvous Peak. That's a solid peak as well that I really enjoy doing. So you mentioned both your parents were wildlife biologists. Mm-hmm. Nice. So what they like specialize in? Anything in particular?
Yeah, my dad was a migratory bird biologist.
Super cool. Yeah,
and
that's neat.
My mom did natural resources and realty. She was a manager. So they both worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Oh, wow.
As a result, I was raised in the outdoors. But like I said, not really mountaineering at all. So that kind of was like a separate path that I took on my own after being raised
That's
outside.
Cool. Well, it sounds like you got out a lot with them. Obviously, their jobs taking them outside, and then going up to you said the Arctic Circle to do some cool stuff. So yeah, pretty epic. And then what did you study in? So Wisconsin, you said Wisconsin, right?
Mm-hmm.
For college?
Yeah, I went to get my undergraduate degree in psychology and flute performance. I was a musician growing up, and I wanted to pursue that. I ended up not eventually, but I did go to Wisconsin kind of because they had a unique program there where I could get 2 degrees. So that's what brought me to the flat Midwest and what ultimately inspired my love of mountains, honestly. So kind of funny how that came around.
Right. No, that's awesome. So I know you talked about Rendezvous Peak, running the ridgeline, and that kind of inspired you. Anything else in particular that got you really into the mountaineering scene in particular, other than Rendezvous Peak?
Gosh,
other than growing up here in Alaska, which probably helped out as well, right? Just being here and living it.
Yeah. So after that experience on Rendezvous Peak, I think I just became obsessed really quickly. And I think something that drove me was my kind of competitive nature and my like intensity. Like I really just love like big activities, physical exertion, being outside. And so I quickly decided I wanted to start climbing a lot of peaks in the Chugach, and I set a goal of trying to get out every week, do like a peak a week in the summer. I don't know like what specifically else kind of inspired it. I guess I have like a bit of an obsessive personality. So once I decided on this, it was just like game over. Like this is what I want to do.
Yeah. Heck yeah. No, it's kind of, I mean, heck, that's how a lot of the people that I've interviewed so far kind of get into it, right? Once you step foot on some of these peaks, man, it just goes from there. So, which is really neat to hear. Do you do any rock climbing or anything like that, or mostly just hiking / mountaineering? Are you into the rock climbing scene?
I do. So when I started, I became a peak bagger pretty quickly, as I kind of alluded to. But in order to try to contribute to this goal of climbing all these different mountains, that was what got me into rock climbing. Initially, I was pretty terrible at it actually, but I was convinced that like I needed to learn rock climbing so I could be a better mountain climber, and so I could get up more peaks. So I started going to Alaska Rock Gym with some friends, and it took me a while to get, I wouldn't say I'm good at it, but it's been a long journey with rock climbing. But rock climbing is fun. For me, it's always been just a way to access more mountains, and that's really been the main purpose behind my rock climbing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned bagging peaks here in the Chugach, and I think I've mentioned it I know I mentioned it on my last episode, probably a few others, but the Chugach, the peaks, I mean, right in our backyard, like we have access to just an incredible amount of peaks. As we learned last night too at the MCA meeting, the Chugach 120. So right across the highway here, you can hop on something, which is pretty epic. And you know that probably more than me growing up here in Alaska. So yeah, that's cool to hear. Kind of a quick, brief background of your upbringing here in Alaska. So that's cool. I don't think I've talked to anybody yet. Maybe Lane grew up here and hasn't left yet, other than for school or something. But that's really neat to hear. It's cool. Thanks for sharing that piece. So let's go ahead and get into Denali. And just like my last episode, there's a lot I think I want to cover for this. And again, with the last episode, we talked a lot about, or we spent some time on like the very specific camps for Denali itself. So I think I want to take a different approach with you today and just really hear about your experience on climbing Denali, which is going to be really neat to hear because, of course, everybody's is different. So if you could, I'll kind of throw the ball in your court, if you will. And if you don't mind, just kind of starting out with the preparation for Denali. So what type of maybe physical and mental preparation did you do for some expedition like that?
Yeah. Well, it's been a while since my trip, so I'll do my best to remember these kind of details. But I think the way my Denali experience kind of panned out was interesting in that I really had this dream of climbing it, and it was all about waiting for the right opportunity till it happened. So for me, that opportunity was getting invited to join a team, and I think that happened maybe a few months before the trip. I can't be sure the exact time frame, but at that time I was really pretty physically active in general. So I don't know that I did a ton of Denali specific training. I was living in Jackson Hole, so I was skiing a lot, climbing mountains a lot, and just generally super active. So I don't know how much like super Denali specific training, but I would say it was one of the most physically active periods of my life. So I kind of just rode that and hoping it would be enough preparation for the mountain itself. But mentally, yeah, once I joined the team, I was just so excited to have this opportunity. As I said, somewhere along the way, I had decided this was one of my life goals. Life dreams was to climb Denali. So once I got the offer to be on the team, it was just about putting the pieces together. So that was, for one thing, I had to get up here. I was living in Wyoming. So finding my way back to Alaska with all the right gear, joining this team, being physically prepared. Yeah, there was a lot of steps involved. And I think it was more the logistics that I was kind of having to navigate than the physical preparation almost, because I wasn't living here at the time.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. How was your team? How did your team come to fruition? Like, did you just know some folks that reached out to you and said, "Hey, do you want to join a team?" Or how did all that come together?
Yeah, well, that's definitely going to be a big part of my story. The team dynamics, which I think anyone who has done Denali can attest to, is by far the most interesting part of Denali, in my opinion. So my dear friend Mark Muller, he invited me to join a team, and it was a few friends that he knew. I think I had kind of met maybe one of them, but it was a team of 5 initially. Something interesting that did happen that kind of impacted the trip was that he was unable to join at the end due to having a surgery, and another group member dropped out as well.
Gotcha.
So it was through one person that I was invited to a team, but I ultimately ended up on a team of people that I relatively did not know.
Gotcha. Yeah, you mentioned like team dynamics, and that's got to be, and we'll probably get into that a little more as you alluded to. That's got to be real interesting. And did you end up, so in terms of like training, were you able to train with that team prior to stepping foot on base camp at all? Like, were you guys able to kind of link up and figure out that team dynamic before?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were, but I would say it was pretty minimal. Mainly because I was not living in Alaska at the time. So I traveled back. I drove up here with all my gear to stay for a month. So I think I had a week or two before the trip. And I did meet my teammates, again, that were through this friend who could no longer participate in the trip. And we did a few kind of training outings together. I remember we got out on the the Raven Glacier. To practice our rope team and winter camping skills, and then did some training runs up in the Chugach State Park, but really quite minimal. So we had kind of all trusted that we were training on our own beforehand because there just wasn't that opportunity due to location.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's again, I'm curious to kind of hear once we start getting into the actual climb here how all that went. So that'll be kind of neat to hear. Because I know I've talked to a few other people that have done guided climbs before, and you're linking up with people that you've never met before. Like, you're setting foot on base camp and meeting people ultimately for the first time and have no idea what their experience level is, and that's got to be really interesting to do. Like, for my team right now, I've got 2 other guys, and we plan on spending 6 months prior to, training together prior to stepping foot on base camp. So it's interesting.
It is a good point that you bring up, and I think a lot of people ask me about that. And at that time, I was just so committed to this dream, and I just didn't really see a lot of other options. I don't think I knew many people who were able to climb the mountain, so I was willing to take that risk at the time. But it is funny to think about, how hard it can be to find Denali partners. I know a lot of people who want to climb the mountain, but they just don't have the right people to do it with. So it's definitely an interesting piece for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure those teams, right, who typically don't train together, or who didn't have the option to train together, I'm sure they figure it out pretty quick how to operate together, because you have to, right? Or else, bad things will happen. Well, cool. So that's neat to hear kind of the team dynamic. And like I said, we'll get into that here a little bit later as well. So let's go ahead and get into talking about Denali itself, right? And kind of maybe touching on the logistics up front, which most people start out of Talkeetna, right? Which I'm sure you guys did initially flying out. So how did all that stuff go down in terms of prepping for, like, with the gear, the food, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
How did that process go?
I'm laughing because I just had a memory that came back to me about this experience. I think the prep went pretty well. I just remember feeling pretty excited, pretty nervous, but we packed all our gear together. There was a lot of it, as you know. just so much equipment that you have to take up on that mountain with you for the time span that the trip takes. But yeah, basically, I think everything went pretty smoothly. I will say that the reason I laughed is because my really vivid memory was the safety talk that you're required to have in Denali before you fly out.
Right.
So one of my teammates, we had to like write our little climbing resumes when you're applying for a permit or something like that. And one of my teammates, I was with, it was a female and a male teammate, and the female had not a ton of mountaineering experience, which was something I was aware of and a little concerned about, but I didn't really have, there was nothing I could do about that.
Sure.
But in the safety meeting, it was the two of us, and the ranger just absolutely tore us apart. He was like, you have ptarmigan peak on your resume for Denali. Like people are losing digits up there. Like he just saw us and thought this group is going to get fucked. And it really upset me because my resume, it was a little different than hers, but it didn't have any of these big peaks that everyone talks about. Like everyone's like, you need to have climbed a near this and that. And I had spent so much time mountaineering in the Chugach and trying to get the skills, and the Tetons, just trying to get the skills kind of on my own. And I hadn't done these big peaks. So I was pretty insecure about like, I felt ready, but I didn't have a big peak on my resume. So our talk at the ranger station instilled enough nerves. I remember going to the ferry that night, drinking a beer, just like shaking in fear because he had just made us feel so bad about our decision to go up there. But I was just
made you guys feel real small at that point.
He did. And I know he had good intentions with like safety, but it was very, very intimidating. Yeah.
So at this point, just to confirm, just 3 people on your team at this point, is that right?
Yeah, 2 had dropped. My friend who had the surgery and another girl on the trip had also dropped due to something else that I can't remember.
Gotcha. Okay. How did you guys, so when you guys initially, so you've never met these people before, right? Mm-hmm. Other than
the few weeks prior to
the trip, prior. Okay. Did you guys, what your initial thoughts on after meeting these folks, like personality wise, you were kind of thinking, hey, this will be a good time, or?
Yeah, I don't know if I had, I didn't really know at first, and I think it all kind of quickly became more apparent on the mountain. Like some stuff happened, some stuff went down. I got along really well with the female on my team. We shared a tent, and I think we just had a super great dynamic. It was so fun. Like she was very, very just easy to talk to and easy to be around. And I didn't connect as well with the male on our trip. It was okay, but I had some doubts about him from the start. So that was where I was a little more worried.
Yeah, man, I've said it before already, but I just find it really interesting that people go out and do these climbs with people they've never met before. And at the same time, in the back of my mind, I think it's really neat, right? Because you get to learn a lot of cool things about these people you've never met before in a very extreme environment. So like that, I think that teaches you really quick to either get along with those people because you have to and trust them, right? Trust is a huge piece of doing a big expedition like this with somebody you've never met. So again, I heard it on my last episode with Michaela, kind of the same thing, and I find that very interesting and something that right now I'm not willing to kind of dabble in that personally, but I think it's kind of neat to do that. So
26-year-old me was like, let's do this if it gets me up to Denali. So I don't know that I'd make the same decision now, but at the time I felt like it was worth it.
No, and again, I find it interesting because, and again, in the back of my mind, I kind of want to do it, like just go out and like, hey, 2 random people. And actually, it was Arnav when we talked about Node Noon Attack. He did the same thing. Never met these guys before. Almost like a post online somewhere saying, hey, who wants to go climb this mountain with me? Cross the Harding ice field, and never met these guys and ended up just sending it. I think that's very interesting because, again, you learn a lot very quickly.
I have a quote that I like to tell myself, which is strangers are new friends. Like, I do think that, like, that's just how I see it. Like, someone's a stranger and then they're a friend.
Yeah.
So you never know.
No, that's great. That's great. Yeah, super neat to hear that perspective. Cool. So logistics, right? You guys in Talkeetna. It was just 3 of you. Do you remember how much weight you guys had initially carrying with you at all?
That's the one detail I do remember. Okay. We did a weigh-in and I was at 110 pounds on starting day, including my skis, which was a lot.
Yeah.
I'm 145 pounds, so it was not a small amount of weight.
Is that just all in your pack, or was that pack plus sled?
That was pack plus sled. So it definitely, But like the sled just like really impacts how you move. And when you start, you're just like, you can barely move your body. It's pretty intense at first getting used to it. But
yep. So you guys skied Denali then, right? Or at least.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned that, these details are all coming back to me. I was on skis, which I don't normally ski. I'm a snowboarder, but I was convinced at the time that it was not a good idea to splitboard Denali. So I kind of learned somewhat how to ski because I thought that would be a better idea, which later I ended up meeting this giant group of splitboarders at 14 camp and really regretted my decision because I would have given anything to have a snowboard up there. But I skied, and I think my teammates were both on snowshoes. If I remember correctly.
How did that travel? How did that travel go? Because I assume at some point you guys were probably roped up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
both
the
on skis and snowshoes.
Honestly, I can hardly remember this. I think that's what it looked like. But yeah, I don't think there was any issues going up with that, to be honest.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Cool. So, Talkeetna, you guys started prepping. You flew out to base camp. Base camp, I think, sits at, 67, right? Is that right? 72. Yeah, you're right. 72. Sweet. 72, you guys hung out at base camp. Did you guys stay the night at base camp, or did you guys get rolling right off the plane there?
Yeah. So from my memory, which isn't that great, but I'm trying my best. So everything went smooth with our flight in. We flew in the day we scheduled, and everything started off pretty smooth, pretty easy. But yeah, I think we got in and just cruised up and kept going up at that point with all of the weight in the brutal midday heat, which, as everyone tells you, it's like super hot down there.
Yeah.
But yeah, things started relatively uneventful for us.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good. Were there a lot of other teams out there at this time when you guys started?
I know it was my birthday, May 25th, that we flew up, and I think that's when the peak season kind of starts picking up. Yep. So yeah, fair number of other teams at that time.
Yeah, very cool. Mm-hmm. Okay, so base camp, 7,200 feet, and then you guys basically just sent it and started heading up. So let's go ahead and talk about, I guess, just systematically take me through your trip up to. So just to confirm, you did not summit, correct?
I did summit.
Oh, you did summit. Okay.
But there's a little. It's kind of complicated. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you could just kind of take us through systematically, like from base camp up to the summit. Obviously, you don't need to spend time necessarily on talking about the specific camps and the elevation, because we did talk about that during my last episode. So again, just kind of want to hear your experience throughout the whole process here.
Yeah. I definitely don't remember the camps and things like that, but I do remember the overall experience, which was pretty wild, to be honest. So basically, yeah, as I said, things started relatively uneventful, but they did not stay that way for me. So essentially, pretty early on in the trip, actually, well, before the trip, it had become apparent that one of my teammates, the female, wasn't like physically super fit. Like it seemed like she may not be ready for Denali. As I mentioned before, we had a great dynamic and I really enjoyed her company and her presence. But she just wasn't like physically, I think, ready to climb Denali. And this was something that I had discussed with my other teammate. We chatted about it once I had gone on some training outings with them. Because I expressed my doubts. She tried her best, but just wasn't like in the kind of shape that made it seem like she was likely to summit. So that was something I was aware of, and I had discussed this with my other teammate, and we had kind of made this plan going into it of like, hey, look, if things work out and don't work out and the female can't come with me, I'm not sure if I should,
we'll leave names
share
out.
names or whatever, but at this point, whatever. But yeah, so if she wasn't able to summit, I had chatted with him about that, and he had expressed that he would go summit with me while she remained at a camp or something like that. There was this like backup plan that I had tried to discuss in order to kind of accommodate this person still coming, while knowing that she wasn't necessarily going to be the best, like have the best chances of summiting due to her physical fitness. So we started off and we're deciding, do we do single carries? Do we do double carries? And I think we mostly stuck with the double carries. But yeah, again, things were relatively uneventful. And then as we started getting up towards 14 camp, this prediction kind of came true. My female teammate was just really struggling. Like, it's just physically so demanding climbing Denali. I think that is probably the main challenge. Like, everyone's like, oh, it's a walk up, but really it's like physically just so hard. You're in a super cold environment, and it's really, just like every step higher you gets harder and harder due to altitude.
Absolutely.
So I think we started noticing like this challenge and like just different speeds, like needing more rest time. On our way to 14, and then once we set up our camp at 14, we got there. Okay, everyone made it. And so once we're at 14, that's when things kind of like you settle in and you start figuring out next steps, like taking trips up to 17, preparing for your summit bid. And at this point, I had kind of suspected that the female wasn't going to be able to summit with us. And again, we had discussed this beforehand, but we were trying to figure out, okay, like, do we take a trip up to cache food and whatnot? So I remember just, so the way it went down, like our first trip up from 14 was basically, I'm trying to remember. I think I may have gone separately from them. I'm not sure if I was like individual or with someone else, but I think, or we got separated during this trip. But basically, we planned our first outing from 14 to 17 to do a stash, and I was on skis, and I must have either gone solo or with like somebody else at this point. Again, I can't remember these details super well, but basically, 16 Ridge is like kind of this like famous part of Denali. It's just this beautiful, pretty knife edge ridge with these drops on either side. And
nice.
My female teammate didn't have a ton of mountaineering experience, and I think this part really got to her. So I remember being out for the first time, and it's definitely intimidating. Like, you really feel the exposure, and you can be pretty safe doing it, but it does kind of feel like you're stepping into that next level of mountaineering on that ridge.
I assume you guys are roped up doing this, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I remember this day distinctly because basically this is kind of when things fell apart. But basically we did our first run to 16. I think we might have gotten separated during it due to like different speeds or something like that. But after I stashed, I went down and I ended up skiing down the head wall. And
nice.
I was separated from the other two on my team at this point. But basically, what I remember is I got back to the head wall, and the sun had gone down, and it was this breakable crust. And I'm a snowboarder and not a skier, and I tried to make these turns down it, and it was so difficult. I ended up falling and like double ejecting from my skis, and everyone at 14 camp can see the head wall. So I'm like literally just like trying to get down, and I just like take this horrible fall, and I'm like, cool, everyone's watching me. I was just not having a good time at this point. So I get back to camp, and at this point, I think we all reconvened at camp. They must have gotten down before me, but here's kind of where things really took a turn. Essentially, my other two teammates had gone up to 17 to cache, come down, and maybe they didn't make it or something, but essentially the female on my team had just decided, like, this is enough. This is too much. I am not capable of doing this. And while I had kind of expected that and thought, she could hang out at 14 and we could continue up, what I didn't expect was when I got back to the camp that night, the guy in my team was basically like, she can't make it. We're going down right now. And that just absolutely shook me. I did not see this coming. And I had just gotten back, taking this big fall. And suddenly my team is announcing to me, we're done. We're calling it. And not only that, but we're going right now. We have to get down tonight. There's a storm coming in. And everything I had put into this experience was just like flashed before my eyes. I was like, I spent so much time and effort and money to be here. Yeah. And to have that happen was really, really disappointing and scary. And it forced me to make a decision about what I wanted.
Sure.
And, they offered like, you can come down with us, but we're going down right now. And again, I felt betrayed too, because I thought we had a contingency plan if that happened.
Yeah.
And yeah, I decided to stay up there. I was like, I'm not giving up. Like, I am not going to be able to afford to come back up here anytime soon.
Yeah,
so my team, with unexpectedly after that night, after the first time going up to 16 to 17, decided to leave. So they packed up camp and left, and that left me basically alone at 14 camp to figure out a new plan to try to summit by myself. So that's the first part of my journey.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. How did so again, I'm probably going to keep like circling back to this whole concept of like not knowing the people before before the fact and like training with folks, but how did that challenge your, I guess, your mental state earlier on in the process of doing the climbing of maybe up to like 14 camp to where, because you guys were roped up, right, at some point, if not most of the time during this. And I'm sure some folks probably slowed you down a little bit, right? How did that play a role, like, again, with your mental state, knowing that, hey, we're heading up here, we're getting close to 14. I want to summit, but I don't think my teammates, or at least one of them, will be able to. How did that play with your mind, if at all?
Yeah, it did, but I would say that I really had thought that I had a plan. Like going into that, I think I was worried, and like again, we got along really well and I cared about this person. Sure. So I was mostly just like worried for her. She was trying pretty hard, but it was just apparent, like, if you're not in Denali shape, you're not in Denali shape. And there was nothing that we could do to change that. And I think going into it, I don't think I was so stressed because I really thought there was a backup plan, because people spend a lot of time at 14 camp anyway. In my mind, there was like, it wasn't the biggest deal if she couldn't summit, because I thought I would have a chance to summit with my other partner. Yeah. And so that piece like was my reassurance to myself, was like, it's okay if she can't make it, I can still go up.
And that contingency plan was discussed between you and the other member, right?
It was, okay. It was agreed upon beforehand, which is again why I felt betrayed, because we had discussed going up if my female teammate couldn't make it. And again, I really, really relied on that, seeing how it was hard for her. I was like, it's okay, you'll still have a chance to summit.
Yeah. Did you guys have those discussions like as a group before starting this expedition? Like, did you guys sit down and kind of like deliberately discuss like, hey, if one of us falls out, we're all going down. If one of us falls out, two of us are going up. Like, did that happen?
Gosh, I think we did. And I think I did discuss it privately with the guy. And maybe I think we had a little bit of team discussion. And I also know I chatted about it with the female as well. Yeah. But I'm not sure if like a whole group discussion. And it's funny because now talking to mountaineers who are pursuing Denali, 100%, this is like the first thing I bring up is like, have you guys talked about all of the contingency plans and discussed everything? Because like anything can happen up there. It brings out a different side in people. And so I think we did have some of those discussions. And the interesting part is that, they don't always pan out.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I was asking, because that's interesting that the discussion did happen. Do you or I guess the discussion kind of happened, right? You said it didn't really happen.
I'm not sure if it happened like
in
the team, because it's like, it's tough. It's an awkward conversation to have. That.
Is that something, I'll throw a little bit of a curveball to you, is that something you regret not having, that kind of like really deliberately taking time and having a conversation between 3 team members and kind of discussing those contingencies?
I suppose that could, I'm not sure. On the one hand, it may have been helpful to kind of discuss that more openly. I also don't know that it necessarily would have changed the outcome, to be honest. Okay. It's hard to say. I think that's valid, once that thing happened, the guy in my group, for other reasons, was very set on going down. I think that it was more that he like didn't want to summit anymore. Gotcha. And used that as a reason to go down. So there was like other things at play just than like, hey, I said I would do this. And plus, like, there's a lot of scenarios where people say things, but then they do another. So I think it had more to do with that than like how much we discussed it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you bring up a great point too, right? You can talk about this stuff and have those team meetings all the time. But like once you're up there, like in the shit, like people change their minds for whatever reason, and things happen, right?
100%. This is something about mountaineering I find so fascinating, is it kind of it can bring out the worst side of people, more like the survival side. So like you can discuss anything you want, and when you're up there, it might all go to shit.
But it's all valid too, right? And I think that's something people have to consider too. Like those are valid feelings and decisions people are making, right? Because it's their life potentially. Yeah. But okay, cool. So you guys, you get the notification that your team is going down and you're going up. So what happens after that?
Yeah, that was a really intense night. I still remember it. On the plus side, the guy that I was with, who had backed out on his agreement to summit with me, did offer me in consolation the mid tent that he bought for the trip. So I had a new tent, so that was cool.
Nice.
Not what I wanted, but at least it was something. And I was by myself, which yeah, for me, 26-year-old me, alone on Denali, I was pretty scared. I remember that night really well. I thought, was this a good idea? Like, what am I doing up here?
What
Just
camp is this at
feeling
again?
pretty lonely. 14 camp.
Okay, 14. Okay.
So, yeah, but I did have a plan. My plan was there's a lot of people up here, and I'm going to try to meet people and find some new people to summit with. So I was very determined, and I was going to see if I could figure it out.
It sounds like an episode of Survivor to me. Like,
oh my gosh, that's so funny. Yeah, it kind of was. No, I've always like joked about afterward how it was like a soap opera, and I'm like, this is a great chance to talk about it. But
yeah, nice.
Yeah. So I think then things started. Yeah, the next morning I woke up, and this was kind of fun. But my next door neighbors were really kind. They came over and they had heard the argument, like not argument, but just like the whole thing that went down the night before. And they made some jokes about it and kind of like welcomed me. And they knew that I was probably in a tough spot. So I immediately started meeting people. The guy next to me was Lee, was really a cool dude, and his partner, who was also having some challenges, he was sick. So I met someone immediately next door who knew what I had just gone through, who was in a similar position of like, hey, I want to go up, but my teammate might not be able to. So then I remember I went around camp and just basically started knocking on doors. I was like, well, I'm up here. I better find some people to climb with. And it was
pitching your own resume.
Yeah. It was pretty scary at first because, I mean, honestly, like I can see the other side. Like most people are not just going to take some random girl who's on 14 camping and like, hey, can I join your team? They don't know me. They don't know my experience. They already have their team. It wasn't really the best offer.
Yeah.
So, but I had to try. So went around, got to meet some of the people at camp, and again, met my next door neighbor. And then I ended up, it was pretty cool, actually. I think I had talked to the Rangers too, but he ended up finding another guy, and this other guy, Ivor, who we basically all were in the same scenario where like one of our teammates was not able to summit with us. And so it was pretty cool. It happened. I'm not sure how quickly it happened, maybe a few days, but we ended up forming my second team. There was more though, but my second team of to attempt the summit. So we called ourselves the Denali Orphans, and this was nice. Super fun. So it was like me, Lee, and Ivor, and we were all 15 years apart, and we just had kind of come together at camp for the same reason, like, hey, we really want to go up, but we're with a team that can't. And when that finally formed and they all agreed on it, I was just ecstatic. I thought, okay, this is it. Like, I stayed up here and it's going to pay off. Like, I found these guys because it was easier than joining a new team. It was more like we're all kind of orphaned. Yeah. So then from there, I think we did a trip up to 17 again, and we had decided we're going to try and summit together. And they were super cool. Got along well. They were pretty fit, very experienced mountaineers, more so than myself. And it was awesome joining with them. So after we went up to 17 again, I think that was my second time at this point. We were getting ready for a summit bid because there's like a small weather window, and unfortunately, summit day came and it was just so cold. So the first day that we get a summit attempt, and I've got this new team, it was like -40 with wind chill. And I remember staying up there with them, being so excited, like I'm going to have a chance. I found this new team. And we get up that day, and I didn't have the best setup with my boots because I had ski boots. And I just, for some reason, thought that was going to be sufficient. It wasn't. So I remember getting up, we had a summit bid, and with Lee and Ivor. And yeah, I had every single layer on. Like, I think like so many layers and my ski boots, and we started up the Autobahn, and from the start, my toes were like rock solid numb.
Yeah.
And I just like think back to that moment. It was not a hard decision. I was like, I'm not doing this. I don't want to lose my toes.
Yeah.
So they actually continued up, and they summited that day. And I think they were one of like 2 or 3 teams to summit that day. It was a weather window, but it was so cold that I think nobody else tried, and they had better equipment. So I had to let them go. But in that moment, it was a pretty easy decision. I was like, I really don't want to lose my toes over this. So I let them go.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah. I had a recent experience with that too, just on Matanuska, where again, I've never had this feeling before. I think because I left my boots out overnight, which was a amateur move, but same thing.
Ooh.
I was climbing up Matanuska, couldn't feel my toes at all. Like they were rock solid, and eventually on the way down, they felt better. But anyway,
it's terrible. When that
yeah,
happens, you just like I feel like there's nothing that can get your toes back.
Yeah, it was a weird feeling too for me. And again, this is just Matanuska, which is just it, right down the road from us. So, okay, so second team, second attempt, if you will. Those dudes went up, and then you went back down to 14? Did you say? Did you go back to 14?
No, I went back to 17.
17, okay.
Hung there for the day, and then, yeah, I mean, the story goes on. So they came down and they summited. Was so excited for them. Pretty sad that I couldn't be a part of that, but like no regrets. Like I like my toes, so it was not a hard decision.
And you said you only had ski boots with you, is that right?
Yeah.
The entire time?
Yeah, because I was skiing, and I think there's other ways you can do it. Like you can get mountaineering boots with the little ski compatible tech binding piece.
Right.
Or I had an overboot too, but it just did not. It was just not sufficient for a really cold summit day. But once they got back to camp, then what happened was I remember they had already connected. Everyone kind of knows each other. Like you're hanging out at camps for all these long periods of time. You just like get to meet your neighbors. And so when they came down, I think they had already had this idea maybe, or no, we were all packed up to go down back to 14. And I think maybe I had called it at this point, but we went over to talk to another group and they had something similar happen, but there was a guy in this other group who was still looking to summit. So I basically immediately found my next target for team number 3.
Nice.
And I was like, here it is. His name was John. And I was like, wait, you still want to go up? Sold. Let's go. So found my third team, and we all headed back to 14 to regroup and go for the next bid.
Wow, that's crazy. Are there any more teams? Are you going to go to 4 or 5 and 6 or what?
No. So from there, do you want to hear the rest of it?
Yeah, heck yeah. Let's hear it.
So basically, I mean, it just is so funny to think back on this because, when you're planning Denali, you don't expect this.
Yeah, that's insane.
But I think people, it happens to a lot of people that like stuff falls apart. Like my experience is kind of unique in some ways, but in others it's not. Like this is just what happens up there. Like shit hits the fan and like people come out.
It's funny hearing this from you, but like, again, when I think about it, like it makes sense. Like it has to happen very, very frequently, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what else? Let's hear about. Now you got a 2-man team, right? 2-man team?
Sort of. Well, that's the other funny piece. Okay, so I find this guy and I'm like, all right, next target. We got another new team. Yeah. He expressed interest and he's like, well, basically, like, let's talk at 14. So we all head down and essentially this guy, John, was there trying to climb Denali with his dad and his sister. They were doing like a cool family trip. So we got back to 14. We kind of like chatted it all out and we made a plan, and it wasn't the best plan, but it was still something. And that was that we were going to try, I think it was him and another guy, and then his dad and his sister, we were all going to try to go up together. And then this one's kind of funny, but basically, so we leave from 14. I'm going up 17 the third time, which I cite for why my summit day was easy, because I was just lapping up and down 14 to 17. Like,
it better be easy at this point. Right?
I mean, not by choice, but just because this team dynamics were going so crazy. So then we head up to 17 again for summit bid. Hopefully this is the time. And John and I are pretty similar speed, which was nice because it's just like cool when you get in a groove like that. So we went up, and the rest of the team, our other teammate, and then the dad and sister followed behind. And here shit hits the fan again. So we got up to 17. I'm like, yes, this is it. This is finally going to happen. And we're waiting. We get our snow. We set up the whole snow cave thing, and then we get our tent going. Waiting and waiting and waiting. I knew they were going to be a little slower. Like, I wasn't sure about the other team members, but I'm like, whatever, it's something. And so we're waiting for like what feels like hours. And so finally the others get into camp and they're like, we don't have a tent. And I'm like, what? So I have my 3-person tent, right? And there's 2 of us, which if you have all your gear, you really only want 2 people in a 3-person tent. Yeah. They got up to camp, and on their way up the ridge, one of them had been carrying the tent below his brain. He opened his backpack, tent blows out. 2,000 feet below on the glacier. Instead of going down, they chose to come up. Not a decision I would have made. Yeah, but that's the decision they made.
Absolutely. Interesting.
So we went into guide rescue mode, and basically like I was like cooking water and like food, and like they were really down bad, but they were there. So we had to figure it out. So spent the night in guide mode taking care of them. One of them, the guy dug a snow cave to sleep in, and the rest of them squeezed 4 of us in a 3-person tent to get through the night. It was not great, not a good situation.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so at this point, there's 4 people in a tent, right? 1 in a snow cave.
Yeah.
Your third team.
I'm sitting here shaking my head. Yeah.
What an experience. Wow.
I know. This is why I picked Denali. I've been waiting to tell the story. It was just like it was quite the experience. I didn't expect any of this, but we're just rolling with it.
Yeah, heck yeah.
So at this point, I feel like the guy I had met, John, seemed like a good summit partner. And there was another guy too, that I thought would make a good summit partner. However, John's family, again, they didn't seem like physically capable of it. Based on like how they managed getting up to 17 camp. So once we were there, all crammed into my tent, I'm just like, dear Lord, I hope I get the chance to summit with this guy. Like his family is here. They don't really seem like they're capable of this, but hopefully we'll still have a chance. And so after we made it through that very long night, the next morning, thankfully, the dad and daughter decided to go down. They decided this is not going to happen. And I was so, so thankful for that decision because I knew there was no way they were getting at the summit, but I'm glad that they came to that realization on their own.
Sure.
They have a quote up there like, if you need a rescue, you're going down. You don't get to get rescued and then go up. So I was thankful that they also could see that. But then, the funny thing is after all this stuff has happened, then I joined with John and the other guy that came up with us who wasn't related. But we went for the summit. And honestly, compared to everything else, that summit day was easy. Like now that I had navigated all this stuff and just like was orphaned on Denali. Once I got the team, we just did the thing and we got to the summit, and I was very thankful for that opportunity.
Man, that's epic. Honestly, I wasn't expecting a story like that, but 3 teams later, right? Yeah, 3 teams later, they finally summited.
Yeah,
that's interesting. And again, that's got to happen more often than people probably think. Which is, again, I never would have thought about that until now. But
no, I appreciate you saying that. And again, like I know you just interviewed someone on Denali, but for me, it was thinking about all the peaks I've climbed. It absolutely stands out as one of the most interesting, just because you go into it with this plan, and then I feel like for most people it just never goes how you plan it. And in my case, it really didn't. But what did happen was kind of exciting and really unique in its own way, and like ultimately successful.
Yeah, no, that's great. Again, something that you'll definitely remember this experience, and again, luckily you're able to summit as well after going through all that stuff, so that's pretty neat. Now, what about the so you summited, what about the down climb? Any interesting kind of points on the down climb, or was that pretty uneventful?
Yeah, the down climb was actually a little tough. I think John and I were pretty matched in skill and our physical fitness, so we were like well matched as a team, but the guy that had joined us wasn't quite as matched, and so John did a solid, and he really helped the other teammate get down. And I ended up basically just skiing down on roped because I felt like that would be less of a risk than trying to go. And like they did their thing, and it was definitely every time people talk about sleds, I just remember this distinctly because sledding down Denali is like got to be the worst part. Like it's so bad. But like this other guy was just like in tears. He was just so demoralized because of how hard it was. So I kind of detached. John really helped him out, was emotional support, and they went down together with John's help. And I skied down solo.
Yeah, nice. I bet that was pretty epic, skiing down Denali.
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was not as easy as I would have liked. Not being a skier and having a sled, I was just survival, but I just had to get down, and you do it in like a couple of days. But so it worked out okay. We all ended up getting down at around the same time, which was good. You just want to get off as fast as you can at that point. So.
Yeah, very nice. Cool. And then you got back down to base camp, and then flew back to Talkeetna, right?
Yes, and I distinctly remember going into the ranger's office to sign that I had successfully completed, hoping that ranger saw me being like, I did it, because I knew he doubted, but I was really proud of myself for persevering despite all of the obstacles.
That is really neat to hear that, and we'll go ahead and I think I want to transition. Actually, I have one more question. So after all of that, right, 3 teams later, essentially, looking back, is there anything that you would have changed with that experience in terms of whether that's preparation or during like execution, actually climbing the mountain? Is there anything that you would have changed to make that experience, I don't know that I would say better, but or different, I guess is probably the more appropriate word.
Yeah.
Or would you not change anything? Like that can be an answer too.
I know, it's kind of funny because a lot of people have asked me that because it sounds just so dramatic and tumultuous and all this stuff. So while I don't necessarily think that it was the smartest ideas and like all of that, and like, sure, it would have been more ideal to have a team that I knew and be more prepared and have a better dynamic. But I have to say, like, the way it went down exactly as it did, just, yeah, I think that was what was so meaningful. It was like the fact that I overcame that adversity and still climbed the mountain.
Yeah.
I have to say that, like, if I had been smarter and more prepared, like, I couldn't have had that experience that I did, which was so unique in its own way. So, yeah, no, I don't think I would have changed it.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I'm sure you're very thankful too for the folks that were up there that accepted you in, right? Into their team, because I'm sure that's a difficult process for other members too to accept new people into the team. But just like you said, right, they were all in the same kind of state that you were in, probably looking for members. So it kind of worked out in your favor, right? Just kind of creating this new team up there.
It really did.
Summiting.
And we had a great dynamic, to be honest. Like, you know, how you said, like, you go into climbing with new strangers, whatever. While it didn't work the first time, the Denali Orphans team was fantastic. We actually met several times over the following years to do trips as a team together. We ended up skiing Mount Hood later.
Wow.
And so, like,
awesome.
Just goes to show that it can work really well. I think our team dynamic was awesome, and I really like those guys.
Yeah, that's incredible. I didn't even realize like that was even an option to like do that. And again, someone who's never been up there before, I never really crossed my mind like, hey, if my buddies like fall out, like I still have an option to like join another team. There's random people up here that I could just talk to, you know?
If you're desperate enough, like
yeah,
I was
so.
like, I'm not gonna afford another flight up here, so might as well make it work while I'm here. That was my mentality at the time.
Yeah, that's super cool. Hey guys. First, I want to give a quick thanks to all of my current supporters and also say welcome to the new listeners that have recently found the show. Since releasing this podcast last November, I've had some recurring questions come up from many listeners that I wanted to answer. A common question that has been brought up multiple times is, what was the motivation behind starting this podcast? And I love hearing this question because there is indeed very specific motivation behind starting this project. As many can relate to, during solo climbs, all you have time to do is think. So during a lot of those climbs, I found myself revisiting this plan in my head of how cool it would be to sit down and talk with folks that enjoyed challenging themselves and climbing peaks in one of the most beautiful places in the world. After thinking it over for a while, I quickly realized the opportunity was there to not only connect and engage with local climbers and mountaineers, but hopefully inspire people at the same time through those conversations. I also discovered there were many climbing podcasts already established. However, all of them either focused primarily on the training aspect or interviewed and featured big-name sponsored athletes within the climbing community. Additionally, a podcast that focused just on Alaskan peaks did not exist. Although these shows are absolutely incredible in their own way, I felt as though I had the need and opportunity to capitalize on providing a show that featured Alaskan climbers and mountaineers of all levels. So this past October, I was on a work trip in the lower 48 and spent a long weekend in a cabin in Tennessee. I actually had plans to do some hiking that weekend. However, I ended up staying inside that cabin the entire weekend to develop a podcast outline. And the Bagging Alaska Peaks podcast was born. Again, I appreciate all the support so far during this process and look forward to many more conversations. Let's bag some more peaks. Now let's go ahead and transition into, because again, you talked about a lot of stuff that dials into kind of the next segment of this episode or podcast, is talking about the physical, mental, and spiritual piece of climbing and like why people do it. So if you could just take a few minutes and you could relate it back to like your experience in climbing Denali, which there's a ton of mental roadblocks that I'm sure you encountered, or you can just talk about mountaineering in general, but any particular physical, mental, or spiritual piece that you want to talk about that got you through to actually summiting?
Yeah, I love that question. And mountaineering has been such a big part of my life, and it's also changed its role in my life. But yeah, I think the first word that comes to mind is tenacity, which is something that especially then I had a lot of, and it helped me discover that. Like, just I came to mountaineering and peak bagging in the Chugach, and I think it was really like a form of personal growth. Like I taught myself that I can do what I set my mind to. And I just really felt like the sense of accomplishment, being able to set these really hard objectives and doing things by myself. And then the ability to follow through and do that just like really taught me that I can do things and I can do what I set my mind to. And that was really empowering. And I think that absolutely played out on Denali. My mom nicknamed me the tenacious Denali orphan, which I still laugh at that like nickname. But I was so tenacious with it. Like I just wasn't going to quit. And that is what got me the summit. And I think there's also like the safety component. Like I'm actually kind of a wuss when it comes to like safety. So if I'm scared or anything like that, I'll quit. But like I'm going to give it my all like in every other way, except when it comes to like risking my life in some way that I don't think is smart. But yeah, like mountaineering was always really this like form of like personal growth for me. But I've noticed its role change in my life in recent years. And I think I've relaxed in that intense drive. Like I have to climb this, I have to do this as I become more sure of myself. And I think I have a different relationship with it now that isn't so driven in some ways by insecurity about like trying to prove something. But now it's like more about like the joy of it and like the experience of these isolated, beautiful wilderness areas and sharing it with other people. So I definitely, I think it's really changed over time for me, my relationship with mountaineering.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. Do you think you kind of mentioned kind of proving something to, I guess, other people and yourself? Do you think earlier on climbing Denali at such a young age, that was the driving factor, was proving to others, or was it more or less for yourself? What do you think? Or was it a combination of both?
That's a good question. I think it probably was really a combination of both, as I'm sure it is for a lot of people, whether or not they would admit that. But I do think, a lot of it was to prove to myself that like I could do these really hard things that I set my mind to. That's cool. Definitely both though.
And as you mentioned, right, I'm sure a lot of people, it is probably the same, but they may not want to kind of talk about that or really admit that piece. But that's interesting to hear. And what about the spiritual piece? And the reason I bring this up, typically a lot of people don't like talking about the word spiritual, but I like asking this question, right? Because it doesn't have to relate to religion or anything like that, right? Because when people do hear that word, typically that's what comes to mind. But is there anything spiritual about mountaineering that connects with you at all? Like, again, a lot of people that I've asked kind of in the past, like, why do you climb? Is there some sort of like spiritual piece for you in that journey? And some people have talked about just obviously that internal drive to doing what they enjoy or what it means to them. And I'm always curious to kind of hear that piece, kind of the spiritual motivation behind mountaineering.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to ask that of others and of yourself in the pursuit of mountaineering. And I guess, for me, I do think it really is a spiritual experience to be in the mountains. I think for me, it just is one of the few things that truly puts my life into perspective. Being out there and like, especially when you're just like so focused and locked in on the moment and everything else falls away and it's like, you just kind of forget about all of the stuff of daily life that like is so tedious or like the dramas or things like that. And when you're out there, it just makes it all seem really small. And I think that's why I've continued to go seek those spaces. And especially like when you're doing these kind of things solo, that can be even more powerful of an experience. But it's really special to me to have that feeling when I'm out in the mountains and like just by the force of my own body to just like feel how powerful Mother Nature is. And I've always felt kind of like the mountains are like my family, like in a way. Like that's how they feel to me when I'm out there.
Yeah. It is a definitely unique experience doing something like that, and doing something as epic as Denali, and being up there and kind of witnessing, right, Mother Nature and what it can do to you, and all the other elements associated with it. So yeah, that's really neat to hear. Cool. Well, yeah, we kind of talked about, obviously, Denali, your crazy experience, and going through 3 teams, which is pretty insane. And then, talked a little bit about the physical, mental, and spiritual piece. I guess really the last few questions I have for you is, what's next for you? Is there anything kind of on your mind that you have your eyes on? Any peak that you want to climb in the near future?
Yeah.
That you've been planning for?
So a goal that I've kind of had the whole time, like before and after Denali, is really to climb the Chugach State Park. The 120.
Yeah.
When I started, I didn't even know about the 120, but now that's like become this thing, which is kind of cool. And that's always been at the forefront of like my mountaineering goals, is like whether or not I've always said, like, I don't really know if I'll ever complete the 120, but for me, it's just about the journey of trying. Like, I absolutely love these mountains that are in our backyard. And for me, it's so cool to have an objective, like climbing all the different peaks that gets you into such remote zones. And as talked about this in his MCA presentation yesterday, but just like for me, it's like so cool when you have a goal that like forces you to just get really uncomfortable. And so, and just like going to all these really remote spaces is definitely, that's my goal, is to kind of hit that hard this summer. And I think something that I want to do with it is like, I want to experience climbing the Chugach with different friends of different levels of experiences and skills. And I also like want to bring some fun and levity to it, because I think mountaineers can get a little serious sometimes. It is a serious sport, but I'm always like trying to just like lighten it up. So trying to bring some fun wherever I can into like my climbs is another thing that I try to prioritize. So
what are your thoughts? What are some examples of how you would bring fun into climbing? Anything in particular? Because I know Andrew, right? The dude brews his own beer and, names it after the peak he's climbing, right?
Yeah, he brought one of his beers on a trip we did, and I was like, oh boy, you're bringing 10% stout in the middle of a 20-hour day? I was like, I know about this. Like, that was kind of scary, actually. But yeah, no, some of the things is like just like having some at dance parties, or like I have like this light whip that I use for like raves and stuff. I brought that on a trip I did with Andrew, and we got like some cool pictures, like
nice.
light whipping in the mountains. But just like little stuff like that. And I think it's like, it's more of an attitude too, just like trying to have fun with it whenever I can is like something that I try to cultivate.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a cool perspective. And yeah, you're right. Mountaineers, we can be pretty serious, right? Because when you get up and you set up camp, it's all about systematically cooking up your food and then making sure your gear's all prepped for the night, going to bed and all that good stuff. So it's cool. It's cool that you can have fun with it.
Yeah, like when Andrew and I are getting ready to climb this peak that we did last fall, it's like 4 a.m. and he's like, we're all getting ready to summit, and I like bust out my light whip, which is like this cool like LED pixel thing where it's like beautiful. It's dark out, and he's like, we're trying to like leave for summit day. I'm like, but just real quick, like let's light whip a bit. This looks so sick out here.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. Yeah. G, I want to thank you for taking the time. Let's see, we attempted this. This is our third attempt.
Just like Denali.
Just like Denali. Hell yeah. So it worked out.
Full circle.
Hell yeah.
Sometimes third time's a charm.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks again for coming out to support the conversation, and hearing about your experience is super unique, and really interesting to hear. So again, thanks for sharing that conversation. Hopefully, once you start kind of digging into the 120 more, maybe we can get out there and do some pics together as well. So
that would be awesome.
Yeah. Thanks, G. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
If you enjoyed this episode, please take a few minutes to subscribe, drop a comment, or leave a rating, as this helps support the project and reach other listeners. If you would like to connect with other climbers, hikers, and mountaineers, consider joining the Mountaineering Club of Alaska. Additional information can be found on the website at mtnclubak.org. Original music has been provided by Emberloom. I am your host, Sean Cordes. Thanks for listening, and safe climbing.